Hey there, Parker Reed here, and welcome to PR Media, your home for everything movies and music through my eyes. Today we're going to be taking a look at my top 10 4K Blu-rays I have in my collection. As you can see, I have far too many. There's over 500 and there's more Blu-rays and DVDs over there, but just going to look at 4Ks today. Now, anyone who knows me knows I'm a big supporter of physical media, and there's over 500 4K Blu-rays in my collection. So choosing a top 10 was hard for me, and I couldn't rank them from worst to best because they're all so different. So this is in no particular order. They're just my top 10 favorite 4K Blu-rays that I've returned to the most, that I think look the best, and that I think sound the best. The first release I want to highlight is Annihilation. This is a sci-fi film starring Miss Natalie Portman. And if you haven't seen it, you definitely should. It's underrated. I gave it a rewatch last night. And this film looks fantastic. And there's some scenes in the environment they call the shimmer, which really show the wide color palette that this movie has to offer. And it looks great in 4K Ultra HD. So if you haven't checked out Annihilation yet, you won't regret it. Next up is the only release I'm going to highlight from the Marvel Cinematic Universe because they all look fantastic, and they definitely should when they all cost $200+ million each. But my favorite looking and sounding film is The Avengers, the original 2012 Avengers. And this isn't my favorite film in the entire franchise, but it's the best looking. It's full screen, it's pure, there's no grain at all, it's digitally shot. It looks fantastic, and the action and the explosions and the drama within this film really shine on 4K. And look at the steelbook. It's great as well. And I'm not a big fan of the Disney Marvel slipcovers usually, so when they have great steelbooks like this, I like to pick them up. Definitely check out The Avengers. I'm sure everyone's seen it already, but check it out on 4K again. I think you'll enjoy it. The area in which I think 4K really shines is in the sci-fi and fantasy genres. And one of the highlights from recent years is Blade Runner 2049. Now, I have too many releases of it, as you can tell from here. But Blade Runner 2049 is a sequel to, of course, the classic 80s film Blade Runner starring Harrison Ford. But this time they made an upgrade, and this stars Mr. Ryan Gosling, the best actor alive in my opinion. And I paid a lot for the steelbook because it sold out initially. And Blade Runner 2049 is one of the best films of recent years in my opinion. It's one of the classic of where I think the sequel is better than the original. And this film really shines as far as 4K Ultra HD and HDR goes, because there's a lot of really dark scenes, there's a lot of bright scenes, so you can see the contrast in what 4K has to offer. And it's crisp, and it's beautifully drenched in reds and blues, and it feels like it's raining or snowing this entire movie, and it just shines on the screen. If you haven't seen Blade Runner 2049 yet, please do. It didn't do well at the box office, so support it on home physical media. It really deserves it, and hopefully we get a sequel someday, but I'm not holding out for it. Alright, you probably saw this one coming, but it's no surprise. We have Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight, it looks fantastic. It was shot in 8K, so it was downscaled for this 4K release. So whenever we get 8K physical disc, if it ever happens, you will see The Dark Knight released there. Now, there's nothing I can say about The Dark Knight that hasn't already been said. It's a classic superhero film, and it's one of the best films made over the past 10 years or so. There's a lot of these scenes were shot in IMAX as well, so they fill up the entire screen, and they go back to normal aspect ratio sometimes. And this is one of the crispest films I've ever seen on 4K. And the sound on this movie, you better turn it down lower than you normally do, because if you don't, you're going to blast your own eardrums, and your neighbors are going to complain to the cops. They're going to come to your house and take away you, and your TV's going to sit there collecting dust, because it's absolutely bombastic. It's deep with heavy bass, and it really shows just how great this soundtrack is. So if you've seen The Dark Knight, which I'm sure you have, but you haven't seen it in 4K or with HDR yet, please do. You won't regret it. I'm not a huge TV guy. I've never really gotten into TV shows that much, but one show I really did get into was Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is a fantasy series about George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire novels, and anyone who knows about it knows it had a controversial ending, but I've got season 1 on 4K here to highlight because it looks great. It's full screen again. It was shot in 2K and upscaled to 4K, but you wouldn't be able to tell. There's no grain, and it looks really fantastic in my opinion. And it's hard to do TV in 4K because a lot of it's not shot in that high of resolution, but Game of Thrones was. And up until about a month ago, we only had Season 1 and Season 8 in 4K. Season 8 looks great as well, but I think Season 1 looks a little bit better. We're getting the complete 4K set in November, so I'm going to look forward to seeing how all the seasons look in 4K. But if you're looking for a great TV show to watch in 4K, check out Season 1 of Game of Thrones, and just try not to think about Season 8. I've blocked it out in my mind. Next up is the 4K release of my favorite film from 2019, that is Joker. I've got the Steelbook here as well as the standard release. And Joker is starring Joaquin Phoenix. He won Best Actor at the Oscars this year for his performance in this film. And if you haven't seen Joker yet, it's the darkest take on the Joker story yet. This movie is depressing from start to finish. But in that depression is one of the best pictures I've seen of 4K yet. It's full screen, just like the past few releases I've been talking about. And the colors used in this movie it's like watching a painting. It works incredibly well with the score. And even though this movie's depressing as far as the content goes, I can't help but just stare at the screen and how beautiful it looks. It looks like a painting the entire time. And Joker is probably one of my most rewatched 4K releases so far, just because I enjoy the movie so much, and it looks great. If you want to show off how great your TV looks to your friends, I would definitely recommend using Joker to do that. I even did that when I moved into my new place. A friend was over, and I showed him a scene or two from Joker, and he's like, oh my gosh, I need to get invested in 4K because it looks so great. I don't blame him. So I didn't really start getting into 4K until a couple years ago after I graduated from college. But before that, I had one 4K disc in my collection because this is my favorite movie of all time, and that is La La Land. La La Land, starring Ryan Gosling and Emma Stone, is my favorite movie of all time. It's a musical about love and finding your path in life in the city of Los Angeles. And this movie is an example of just the wide color gamut that HDR enhances, and the musical scenes and just the overall scenery in this movie really pop off the screen. And La La Land shows how great these 4K releases can sound as well. Obviously, being a musical, it's going to have great musical numbers. And I would recommend buying this at the highest resolution just because it's one of the best movies ever made, in my opinion. It's my favorite movie ever made. Buy La La Land. The slipcover is beautiful. The entire release is beautiful. Pick up La La Land in 4K. Even if you don't own a 4K player, just to kind of flex in your friends. The most recently released 4K release on this list is Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. You know it, you know the memes. I don't need to tell you much about this movie. This is where we see Anakin Skywalker become Darth Vader and start the original trilogy of Star Wars films. And this is the first movie I ever saw more than once in a theater, back in 2005. I think I was 9 years old at the time. And that's kind of an intense movie to go twice to as a 9-year-old. But I love revisiting this movie. John Williams' score on this is probably my favorite score ever in a movie. The fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan just blasts through the speakers, and the HDR and the Dolby Atmos soundtrack really contribute to that. This movie is crisp looking, there's no film grain, it was digitally shot. The CGI looks surprisingly good for 2005, and it's one of the best Star Wars releases to come out. Only a few more releases here, so next up we got John Wick, the first of the trilogy, and all three of these films look really good as far as their 4K and Ultra HD and Dolby Atmos and HDR goes. It's a great action movie. There's a lot of in-camera work. I don't need to say much more about it. It's John Wick. It's a classic. Check it out in 4K. One of the reasons to check out 4K so much is their HDR and their black levels. So I wanted to pick a horror movie to show just how good horror movies can look and how deep and inky the blacks can look. So we've got The Witch, one of my favorite horror movies, and more, not necessarily as suspenseful or as like a traditional jump scary horror movie, but it looks great. It's got a great story. You could really need to pay attention with the audio because it's a realistic take as well. So if someone's talking in another room or in a different part of the house, you really need to listen in closely so it doesn't sound like they're wearing a lavalier mic and sitting right next to you. The Witch is a really good 4K release, one of my favorite horror movies in 4K, and a release that you can check out for a pretty cheap price, and one I think you'll enjoy watching and will rewatch over and over again. There you have it. I hope I convinced you to get into 4K. It really changed my movie watching experience for the better, and those are my top 10 releases in no particular order. Of course, that's always subject to change as more come out and my tastes change and my love for different movies change, but if you're just getting into 4K, check out those releases. That's a really great starting point for you. My name is Parker Reed, and you've been watching PR Media. Thank you so much for the support. remember to keep supporting physical media, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.